Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. We'll have a stakeout from by Mr. Egeland. He'll take questions afterwards. Mr. Egeland.
Thank you very much. I've done this work leading the Humanitarian Task Force for nearly 3 years. There's been too many setbacks. We have failed more often than we have achieved what we wanted, but there has also been some positive developments. And we have two now I would like to mention. First, Idlib. We have now had 5 weeks without any air raid. I cannot remember such a period for the last 3 years in Idlib. It's a calm through this very sensitive, complex, difficult area full of 3 million civilians. It is a welcome calm. We also have access in all areas, virtually all areas of Idlib, with assistance coming cross-border. The agreement and the implementation of the Russian-Turkish agreement has so far not impacted our access, we were reported today. However, as we explained to the Russians and to the Turks and to others, we have still a million of unanswered questions of how the implementation of this agreement may affect protection of civilians and humanitarian access. Because we are still in the implementation phase, we do not even have an exact map of how the buffer zone would be, the buffer zone which is supposed, also called a demilitarized zone, because heavy weapon and also listed terrorist organizations are supposed to be leaving this area, and there will be special arrangements. Inside of Idlib, there are reports of, as well as in the zone, of groups building more fortifications, as there are also signals that conflict may indeed engulf parts or most of Idlib. So the fear, the angst has not left Idlib. We now have a window of opportunity to help people in calm. And that is important before the winter. The Russian and the Turkish side have indicated that indeed more time will be given to implement the agreement. Some of the first deadlines have passed or is being passed. There will be more time for diplomacy. And that is a great relief to us, because if one is to follow a military logic that has too often been followed in this war alone, it would be horrific news, not only for civilians, but also for humanitarians, of whom there are 12,000 colleagues in Idlib. Also positive news is that Western donors have all now said that the temporary restrictions on aid flow due to concerns around possible deviation of resources to listed groups, that has been lifted. All donors have resumed aid again. Extremely important, because this was supposed to be the time where we used the calm to preposition relief before winter and before possible fighting against listed groups and others. Another piece of positive news is that the 45 to 50,000 people in Rukban in the desert next to the Jordan-Syria border in the southeast of Syria, they will get a convoy we've been assured that we will have all the green lights and permits from the government in Damascus to send a convoy with food, with health, with sanitation equipment, all that is needed for a population in Rukban that has had the most desperate pleas now in latter weeks for aid. I think it's one of the most desperate places in Syria now. The last time we reached Rukban was in January with a convoy. We hope within the next week we can send this long-awaited convoy of relief. There has been reports even of deaths inside because of lack of relief, and the situation has become increasingly desperate because the few trickles of goods, civilian goods, supplies, commercial supplies and others that were earlier reaching Rukban has not been able to get through in the last couple of months. One more, also a trickle of positive news was that the Russian Federation said again that the very concerning Law 10 promulgated in Syria, that is a law that enables expropriations from the housing land and property that may have been owned by displaced people and refugees. That law is withdrawn. We've had of late a number of very worrying reports that indeed there is expropriation, according to Law 10, happening in the Damascus area and elsewhere. When Russia says that it is withdrawn and there were mistakes done when one had initiatives referring to the law, it is some good news. Hopefully this will now be reality on the ground. So diplomacy can win, or even in Syria. The military logic doesn't have to be followed always. Why hasn't it been followed before? It's one of the questions I really carry with me. Why wasn't more time given to more diplomacy to solve issues so that we had more access and we were able to protect more civilians? Finally, I think all of this is also connected to Syria being a place where everybody declaring that they are actually in a war on terror. Now, indeed, that there are many fighters who have extremist leanings and who are listed as terrorists, among them Islamic State, that is being fought as we speak in the east, in the area called the region called Deir ez-Zor, where now a village called Hajin, but also several other villages with some 15,000 people, including Islamic State fighters and their families, but also a lot of civilians there, are being attacked from all sides by us Kurdish fighters and by government of Syria fighters. So 7,000 civilians with little attention from the world opinion have fled from this area. Civilians are in the crossfire, and there are also reports that when they flee, they will end up, like many others, in so-called terrorist-affected areas, treated with a lot of suspicion. There is not enough freedom of movement. There is not full and free access for humanitarians to these people. Now, what would be a better way? Well, number one, of course, humanitarians have to show extreme care when we work in areas where there are terrorist organizations. Extreme care. It's my impression that all organizations invest all possible resources now to avoid any deviation of aid. But number two, there is no exception to humanitarian law if you're fighting Islamic State, or if you're fighting Nusra, or you're fighting any other terrorist group. It's not like there are another set of rules. Often, I have the impression that the victims of terror, which is really the widow with 5 children who did not want Islamic State fighters or Nusra fighters or anybody else to move in next door, she's the real victim of terror. And if she is more likely to be attacked because she got that neighbor or not another armed man next door, then we're not serving humanitarian law. And finally, if donors make it so have their anti-terror legislation, meaning that it's so rigid an implementation that the widow with 5 children is much more likely to not receive assistance if she's next door to terrorism, she's also served very badly. And she's victimized twice as in the war, in having terror visit her and then being part of an indiscriminate war on terror. Final point, what's coming up increasingly is that donors say they will not do reconstruction in Syria. I understand that. There is a political discussion around what is really reconstruction and whom should do it. What is non-negotiable is that humanitarian work should happen in all areas, irrespective of whom controls an area. And we now need to meet the people who are under government control and who were earlier besieged, for example, and reached through indirect manners as well now as we were before. Humanitarian work has to continue, and humanitarian work includes rehabilitation of schools, hospitals, electricity, water, and sanitation. So let's agree we do humanitarian rehabilitation, and we do it all over Syria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Egeland. Can we have a mic, please, for the journalists? So who would like to ask questions? Yes, let's start with Laurent.
Laurent Siro, Swiss News Agency. Sir, yesterday the Special Envoy announced that he's going to leave at the end of November. He invited you to join as a special advisor. Does that mean that you plan to leave also at the end of November, or are you going to stay with the next Special Envoy?
I actually decided to leave at the end of November when I was renewed in September, so I'm also leaving at the end of November, and I think it's actually by very much coincidence that Staffan de Mistura, also for personal reasons, is discontinuing his great service to our common cause at the end of November. But there will be another team. We all leave a job half done, unfortunately, and there will be a continued action after we leave.
Yes, I saw another hand there, Tom. Yes.
Well, wish you well with your departure. I don't think we knew about that, but we didn't. Anyway, coming to the question, some of us knew it, some of us didn't. Coming to the question, could you say more about, you said Russia and Turkey have indicated that there will be more time to implement the Idlib de-escalation. I mean, how much time are they giving? When was it planned to come to an end, and how much time do you need? I mean, do you sense that it might be a sort of indefinite stay of execution?
I think it should be. My role is to fight for an indefinite execution of those parts of the deal that they are now negotiating to solve. Give time for the sake of the civilians. We have many questions on Idlib. Among these are the very question: what happened now with groups who are not moving? What happens with a group that is not laying down their arms and is a listed terrorist group? There shouldn't be fighting. There should be negotiations. Give more time. Give time until there is agreement. And I was heartened to hear both Russia and Turkey saying they are optimistic that they can achieve more, much more through negotiations, and they are generally very positive on the implementation of this deal, which is giving relief, a pause in fighting to Idlib.
Other questions? Jamie?
Hi, Mr. Egeland. Couple of things. You mentioned that this is a long lull in the fighting, longest. Is there any way we can start talking about the beginning of the end of the Syria war? That's the first question. I mean, or are there pockets of fighting that people aren't talking about as much and that we still need to keep in mind? Second thing is, your comment earlier about the Russians saying that the Law 10 is going to be withdrawn. That's the first I've heard of it. Can you tell us a little bit about, did they just tell that to you today? What were the conditions of that? Could you just elaborate on that a little bit more? Thanks.
Well, on Law 10, we were also informed some time back that the law is withdrawn as a specific legal initiative. Then I and others brought it up again because we heard of, urban development initiatives, so-called, in the greater Damascus area and elsewhere that were very concerning. And then Russia came back today and said, no, we can confirm it's withdrawn, and if anyone refers to it, it's a mistake. This is what we have to watch now, because the hundreds of thousands of families who will debate now, very difficult debate in their tent or in their hut this winter, should we return next spring? They need to know that they are not robbed from their housing, land, and property. They left something behind. They want to return to it.
First question.
Beginning. Well, I won't paraphrase Churchill here because I don't. Because the big battles have ended in most of the country. That's for sure. Idlib is a huge question mark still, and Idlib could still become perhaps the worst battle yet. It still could become it. Then there is a horrific fighting that nobody seems to be caring about in the very east, with 15,000 people in crossfire between the Islamic State fighters and the attacking forces. And then it's far from, even when war ends in more and more provinces, is it peace? No, it's not peace yet. Peace is going to be built through human rights, through the implementation of rule of law, and when there is opportunities for return in safety and dignity for those who fled.
Other questions? Yes, Agnès?
Yes, hello, Agnès Pedrero, Agence France Presse. Coming back to what you told us before that you are going to leave in November, could you tell us why, and if you already know if you will be replaced and by whom?
Well, the reason I am gone at the end of November is that it's been a very exhausting additional job. I am the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, which is one of the largest humanitarian NGOs. I took the job in the autumn of 2015 when when one was trying to have working parties on humanitarian actions and protection of civilians with the parties. That did not happen. Chronology then is that the humanitarian task force and the ceasefire task force came out of the ISSG, International Syria Support Group. I've chaired that now since February 2016. It's been very exhausting, really, because there hasn't really been an evening or a weekend where we have not been dealing with Aleppo, Homs, Daraa, Eastern Ghouta, now Idlib, Rukban, or some other issues. So that's the issue, and I presume I will be replaced by somebody better, and that they will continue with a task force, because the job is not even half done.
Anybody else? Yes, John? Yeah, you have a second mic? Okay, thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Egeland. I was wondering, sir, if you can give us some readout if there were any details given to you by the Russians and the Turkish delegations concerning the withdrawal of the so-called UN-listed terror groups. If they're going to move out of the Idlib area, where will they go? And the estimates are there are over 10,000.
They did not go through that. They have said now and earlier that there is good implementation of the agreement. The agreement means that the listed groups should leave the buffer zone, and everybody should leave with their heavy guns from the buffer zone, which is called a demilitarized zone, even though there is supposed to remain a lot of both armed groups and the Turkish observation post will stay in that area, in that zone. Of course, the groups will then go into Idlib itself. And what will happen with them there? So indeed, if there was only fighting against the listed groups, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and other groups, would it be 1 million civilians then engulfed in fighting? Would there be more civilians engulfed in fighting? It would be catastrophic. So I repeat, our message is, this is a fantastic deal so far because it prevents bloodshed. It has to continue like that. If there is fighting, if there will be war, and even it is only against the listed groups, it would be completely catastrophic, and we as humanitarians would have a lifeline that will be broken to too many.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands up. So thank you very much, Mr. Egeland. We will surely be sorry to see you going, but there will be other occasion, I hope, to address the Geneva Press Corps. Thank you.